Well, hi, everybody. I'm Don Stewart, and welcome to another edition of Breaking News. Today is Wednesday, the 11th day of September, 2024. And as always, we've had some stories come down the wire the last few hours that continue to set the stage for what the Bible has to say our world will look like at the time of the end of this age before the coming of Christ. Let's get to them. Our first story is really interesting. It's from a Reuters Focus Group. Basically, the undecided voters leaned toward Donald Trump 2-1 after the debate. This is contrary to all the pundits saying that Kamala Harris, won hands down, this and that. It's interesting. Not only Reuters Focus Group came up with that figure when they interviewed some people, but the New York Times also had an undecided focus group that, again, went for Donald Trump rather than Kamala Harris. So we'll see. We'll see. Anyway, we'll talk about that in a minute. Egypt is embarrassed to admit failure to control the Philadelphi corridor, says an exiled analyst. A global AI treaty won't stop tech worshippers from pursuing the post-human era. And this last story, for $5,000 US, you know what you can buy? A real Mexican passport if you live in Iran that includes getting you to Mexico and arrange a trip to the US in under a week, two at the maximum. We'll talk about that and how we know all this. All right, let's look at the headlines. Headline number one, Reuters Focus Group. Undecided voters lead 2-1 Trump after the debate. Although pundits declared Vice President Kamala Harris the clear winner of Tuesday night's debate, former President Donald Trump won 6 of 10 undecided voters in a Reuters focus group. Harris only won 3. A New York Times survey of undecided had similar results. The debate, which was widely criticized for bias on the part of ABC News moderators, was mostly seen as a draw between Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris. These quote unquote moderators are complete hacks. Michael Knowles posted on X. It's 3-1, and Trump is still winning. Some political pundits predicted the debate would have little effect on the election. According to a Reuters sampling, however, 6 out of 10 undecided voters said they were leaning toward Trump due to Harris's vague answers and because they trusted Trump more on the economy, the top issue of the 2024 cycle. Reuters reported the following. They interviewed 10 people who were still unsure how they were going to vote in the November 5th election before they watched the debate. 6 said afterwards they would now either vote for Trump or were leaning toward backing him. 3 said they would now back Harris, and 1 was still unsure how he would vote. 5 said that they found Harris vague during the more than 90-minute debate on how she would improve the U.S. economy and deal with the high cost of living, a top concern for voters. 4 of those 6 also said Harris did not convince them that she would pursue different economic policies than Democratic lame duck President Joe Biden. A Democrat they largely blame for the high cost of living. 6 of the undecided voters were men, 4 were women, and all had previously voted for Democrat and Republican candidates. I felt like the whole debate was Kamala Harris telling me why not to vote for Donald Trump instead of why she's the right candidate, said Robert Wheeler, a security firm executive in Nevada who was leaning toward Harris before the debate. I still don't know what she is for, an entrepreneur from Florida, Mark Kadish said. There was no real meat and bones for her plans. Reuters reported, supported by the New York Times interviews of undecided voters following the debate, Trump's pitch was a little more convincing than hers. Kayla Miller from Milwaukee, a previous Democratic voter, said, I guess I'm leaning more on his facts than her vision. When Trump was in office, not going to lie, I was living better, she said. I'd never been so down in the past 4 years. It's been hard for me. Jason Henderson, a defense contractor from Arizona who voted for the former President Barack Obama, said Harris did not meet his expectations. Trump had more of the commanding presentation. He told the Times, there was nothing done by Harris that could make me think she would be better in any way. So anyway, this is an interesting response from this group of undecideds. And like someone said, remember, these people have to fill up their gas tank, they have to pay the mortgage, they have to pay for the groceries. In the last 3.5 years, it's been much more difficult. And so it's interesting when push comes to shove, it seems that many of them are going towards Donald Trump rather than for Kamala Harris, even though the pundit said Harris was just wonderful last night, which really wasn't, but that's a whole other story. All right, headline number 2. Now, this one is really fascinating. Egypt is embarrassed to admit failure to control the Philadelphi corridor, says an exiled analyst. Dalia Zida, who was forced to flee Cairo for criticizing Hamas after October 7th, today a lobbyist against Iran in D.C., explains why Egypt rejects Israeli control over the corridor. A major sticking point, as we know, in the floundering ceasefire negotiations between Israel and Hamas revolves around a control of the Philadelphi corridor, a 14-kilometer or 8.7-mile strip of land along the border between the Gaza Strip and Egypt's Sinai Peninsula. Last week, Prime Minister Netanyahu made the case for maintaining an Israeli military presence in the area, calling it a strategic imperative to prevent the Hamas terrorist group from rearming, as he explained during a press conference. Both Hamas and Egypt have vehemently opposed the possibility of the idea of remaining in the Philadelphia corridor. While Hamas's objection is self-evident, the Philadelphia corridor is often referred to as the terrorist organization's pipeline for oxygen, as it is Gaza's only contact with the outside world apart from Israel. Egypt's resistance has baffled many, since Cairo already shares a long border with Israel that runs for over 100 miles south of the Gaza Strip. In a recent interview with the Times of Israel, Egyptian analyst Dalia Ziada viewed Cairo's stance very critically. Egyptian negotiators should approach Israel from the point of view of cooperation rather than applying pressure, she said. The national security of our two countries is interdependent. Israel has helped Egypt in the past against Islamist militants in the Sinai, and cooperation between the two countries has been very successful in the past. Why doesn't Egypt do the same with Israel now? At the same time, Zita noted that the rhetoric around Hamas has become more positive in official media discourse after October 7th. Hamas is no longer referred to as a terror organization, but as a resistance group, even though its gunman has killed Egyptian soldiers and civilians in the Sinai in the past. And she goes on to say part of the issue is the money that's paid to Egyptian officials and leaders by Hamas for allowing these weapons to be smuggled in from the Sinai into Gaza. In other words, it's very lucrative for these Egyptian officials there, and they don't want to stop that. This includes, I guess, some really high people in the Egyptian government. So it's a monetary thing more than anything else. And so they should be embarrassed by this. They had an agreement with Israel that they were going to keep these weapons out, to keep the smuggling out, and they've done anything but that. As we already know, at least 150 tunnels were found in the Rafah area so far, and there's more still being discovered. And so Egypt is not guiltless here, but it is interesting how this woman notes that the rhetoric has become more positive about Hamas, calling them a resistance group rather than a terrorist group. This is not good news. All right, headline number 3. This is a really interesting one from Joel Rosenberg's All Israel News. A global AI treaty won't stop tech worshippers from pursuing the posthuman era. An international organization expend greater and greater effort in attempting to regulate artificial intelligence according to the shared values of the international community. Christians must realize they cannot trust such organizations to deter the true dangers of AI. This is because the so-called shared values are not shared by Christians, and because such international treaties do nothing to stop the religious ambitions of the tech worshippers of Silicon Valley. On Thursday, the Council of Europe Framework Convention on Artificial Intelligence and Human Rights, Democracy, and the Rule of Law was open for signature and was signed by Israel, the United States, the UK, the European Union, and others. The document emphasizes the need to establish, as a matter of priority, a globally applicable legal framework setting out common general principles and rules governing the activities within the life cycle of artificial intelligence systems that effectively preserves shared values and harnesses the benefits of artificial intelligence for the promotion of these values. Yet, the question is, what are these shared values which the Council hopes to preserve and promote via AI? Unsurprisingly, they include all the well-known anti-family, anti-Christian values which leftist cultural revolutionaries have been pushing for decades through similar international organizations and their many partners. One particular extreme example of the shared values that the Council of Europe embraces is its open support for Yogacarta principles. In addition to opposing the sanctity of marriage and Christian teaching on men and women, the Yogacarta principles state that children have the right to autonomy and self-determination, and thus that chemical and surgical modifications to their sex characteristics to accord with the child's view can be consented to and by the child. In other words, forget the adults. A 2009 paper from the Council of Europe's Commissioner for Human Rights recommends that member states make gender reassignment procedures, such as hormone treatment, surgery and psychological support, access for transgender persons, and ensure that they are reimbursed by public health insurance schemes. An additional example of the Council of Europe's radical values is its stance on abortion. In a document published earlier this year, the Council of Europe expressed support for women's right to end the lives of their children at any stage of their development in the womb, recommending that nations repeal laws and regulations that prohibit abortion on gestational limits. As AI is increasingly used to curate and disseminate the information which the world consumes daily, and much of Christian ethics, particularly Christian sexual ethics, has been rejected as hateful and discriminatory by a large portion of the creators and regulators of AI, it is not difficult to see that AI will be used to suppress Christian teaching at an international level. And we're not surprised by that at all. The suppression of Christian values, Christian teaching has been ongoing, and AI will not only continue this, AI will promote this. And basically, they'll claim to be the last word on every issue. We just ask AI, what's the answer here? And guess what? It has nothing to do with Christian values, Christian beliefs, or anything like that. The Bible is not taken seriously as the written word of God as we know that it is. And so very sadly, this is where AI is going and leading the world, and the different countries, the US and Israel, sadly, the UK have already signed up for this. All right, finally, our fourth headline. Now, this one is real interesting. This is from a friend of mine named Nodder. Nodder has been referred to by me a number of times in the past without using his name, but he said, Don, you can use my name today on this story. Nodder is a friend. He's an Iranian. He has a fabulous, fabulous testimony. His family was very high up in the Iranian government. His life was threatened. He actually left Iran riding a horse across the mountains as a Muslim. He came to America as an atheist, and someone preached the gospel to him. He became a believer, and now he's basically he works with the underground church in Iran and in Afghanistan. He's a tremendous friend, and a bunch of us get together every once in a while to talk about what's going on in the world, Bible prophecy. And believe me, he knows the inside and out scoop of Iran. He tells us things all the time that we really can't say. I'd love to tell you publicly, we can't do it. And he's also works with the when I talk about the person working with the special forces, that's him. And it's quite interesting stuff that they do. These people won't go into any detail because I never ask a whole lot of questions. But he told me this: each one it costs, and he told me the figure, millions upon millions of dollars to train. That's how good they are. Nodder is part of this group. Anyway, here's what he told me. He said, Don, you can promote this for $5,000 US. You can buy a real Mexican passport in Iran that includes getting you to Mexico and arranges you to get to the US in under a week, 2 weeks maximum. In other words, what he's saying, from Iran, there are people now coming over with Mexican passports. They're paying $5,000 US to get it. They will be flown over to Mexico. They will have a genuine Mexican passport, put in uppercase letters, a real Mexican passport, and they'll be able to come to the US as citizens of Mexico when they're actually citizens of Iran. And obviously, they're not here for for good purposes. And so we'll keep you advised. We hear more about this, but it's sad. And this doesn't even have anything to do with our porous border. These people actually have genuine Mexican passports. There's a group that they pay these people to get them for them, and they're about as Mexican as me, but still they get this. And so it's sad, and they're here in the U.S., and there, as Nodder has said many times to us, there's many, many more terror cells here than people have any wild idea of. And he said they're very dangerous. They're these cells that are just sitting there waiting to get the word to do something. And that's why we need to be vigilant, and we need to pray for our country that this sort of thing will be, found out and stopped before something tremendous happens, another 9/11 or something along that line. Anyway, I thought it was an interesting story. He said you can pass it on, Don. So there we go. All right, I'm Don Stewart. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll be back again tomorrow with another edition of Breaking News. Until then, as always, may the Lord richly, richly bless.